Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to be talking with Professor Rajeev Bhargava today, who's been one of my intellectual heroes, a tremendous source of inspiration, and he's out with his latest book, Between Hope and Despair, directed this time at a mass audience, written in an accessible format, unlike his previous work, which I've admired and I am sure we'll talk much about his academic work today as well. Professor Bhargava, uh, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Anwesh.
I want to start this by talking about the state of public intellectuals, because one thing that I've noticed in the past few years is that academics being somewhat reluctant to wade into the space of uh, the masses, the popular masses. And the fact is that because of that, there is a gap, and that gap is being filled up by people who perhaps do not have the proper expertise, who are clearly not academically rigorous or ideologically motivated. It is those people who are filling that gap, and as a result, the state of our public discourse is becoming very coarse. So I want to understand, because you've been one of the academics who've been reluctant to wade into the public life until now. So what is it that finally inspired you to, led you to wade into the public space?
Right. So there are a couple of things. One is that as you specialize in an academic discipline, you are not only trained to think in a particular manner, which necessarily isolates you from, I won't even talk about masses, by which I suppose we mean the public at large, regardless of how educated they are and so on. But even the general educated reader finds it difficult. I mean, I'll take the analogy of a scientist or even a medical practitioner who's an applied scientist and an educated person. Now, there are so many words that your own doctor uses, which you won't immediately understand. And if you look at an academic journal or a scientist journal, science, a journal of science, there's hardly anything that you'll be able to understand, right? So there is a very big gap between the expert and the general educated person. And the same is true of philosophy, of the social sciences, and even of humanities. There are internal dialogue, internal debates that are going on within the academia. And there is no reason why the general, educated person would have any interest in it. He has other things to do. He's, he has his own problems, both in his home and in his job. He has his own skills and he has his own problems to resolve with those set of skills. So there is a mutual distance between the expert and the public, educated public. Well, if that is the case, then are we condemned to this mutual isolation? I don't think that is necessary. Without lowering the level of your own subject domain and the language and the internal structure of the practices of the domain, if one makes enough effort, one can write in a way that is understandable. With some effort on their part too, it is possible for them to understand. So there is an effort from both sides that have to be made, and we can arrive at some kind of a discourse which is mutually comprehensible. Now, it is this effort which is you need some motivation to make that effort, right? The effort to reach out to a larger public instead of just carrying on with your own academic discourse. It's particularly difficult for younger people who have to make who have to move up the professional ladder. There are issues of publication for journal articles, and many times your own mobility within the field is dependent on how many articles you published and which journals, whether they're published in quality journals or not. And this is a very long process. It doesn't happen quickly. So a lot of time is taken up in that. So for them to find time and to find the motivation and the effort is very difficult. But as one grows older, and with the experience, with better experience of your own at your own teaching, I think you can develop certain skills by which you can reach out to the larger public. And that is what happened in my case. I felt increasingly confident that I can do it. But apart from that, there was just there were external motivations. For example, I felt that our public discourse had become cacophonous. There are a lot of din, and there is very little substance. People didn't understand the meaning of concepts that they're using. Many of these concepts have over a period of time become very different from what they were when they were either born or when they had, they reached a certain height of kind of significance, and it was important to restore the proper meaning to those concepts, to free them of the distortions that had crept in, to remind people of the original purpose behind those concepts, and so on. And that is something that only some of us can do. Teachers who also know a little bit about the subject. I'm not necessarily saying that they are the best in their subject, but certainly they should be good at what they do. And that is one motivation. And the other motivation, of course, since I happen to deal with ethical and moral issues, the other was the kind of dismay at the directionlessness, the moral and ethical directionlessness in our public domain. People didn't seem to even know the distinction between good and bad. They didn't understand that values can have different degrees of objectivity, even though that objectivity can never attain the kind of hard objectivity that one aspires to sometimes in the natural sciences. There is objective right and wrong. There is objective good and bad, and I think that meant that anybody could just do what the hell they want, because they didn't see how to make a distinction between good, something which is worth wanting and something which is not worth wanting. And all of that motivated me to get into the public discourse, to write this book, Between Hope and Desire, but Between Hope and Despair, sorry.
Now, that is a good place to start the discussion because this is the way you start the book. You talk about the relationships between ethics and objectivity, which I've always been interested in. And you take a strong philosophical position that uh, there are, as you mentioned, that there's a certain level of objectivity to values.
Mm.
So I want you to emphasize on that, elaborate on that, and how do we measure the objectivity in values? What is the position that you take? Do you take a utilitarian position? Uh, do you take perhaps a scientific or Marxist position? So how do you know which value is objectively good and bad? And to what extent does it have to do with interpretation?
Oh, it has a lot to do with interpretation. Uh, Objectivity and truth in values is never something can be measured exactly or precisely. It is always backed by a certain kind of reasoning. And the more evidence you have on your side, and the sounder your reasoning, the more likely it is that you'll be able to arrive at objectivity. But I mean, perfect objectivity is very difficult to obtain. And it's not just difficult, it's impossible to attain. You see, there are, on ethical and moral questions, there is never going to be a single answer. There will always be multiple answers. But among those multiple answers, you can identify which ones are good and which ones are bad, which ones are defensible and which are not defensible. And that, to me, is where objectivity comes in. The greater the defensibility in terms of arguments and evidence, the more objective your value position is. That is not to say that it's not going to be contested. That is not to say that you cannot revise it, that you've reached a final and absolute judgment. But there is still a gap between having final absolute judgments and making contextual judgments, where you can, with a great deal of confidence, say that this is objective and this is not. So let me give examples from first other fields. Let's say cricket, right? Now, we know, I don't know whether I'm talking about the time when I saw a lot of cricket, and let's say there were 3 or 4 all-rounders that were widely believed to be in roughly the same category, the great all-rounders. And almost every cricketer who knew something about cricket, or who had played cricket and who could judge, what is good and what is bad in cricket, they had the view that Imran Khan, Richard Hadley, Kapil Dev, Ian Botham, all of them were very, very good. But so they were apart from other all-rounders. So nobody ever disputed the fact that these are poles apart from other all-rounders. Now, but once one reached that circle of great all-rounders, there began a kind of a dispute between who is the best. And I don't think there's a single answer to who's the best, but there is a single answer to who are the best, right? As opposed to the bad ones. Take another example, this time in music. You know that among Hindustani classical music, I'll take examples from that. Again, people from my generation, not from yours. There was Kumar Gandharv, Mallikarjun Mansoor, Kishore Amonkar, Bhimsen Joshi, just to name 4 great Hindustani classical musicians. Now, nobody would ever say that these are no, but there was no disagreement on which ones, whether nobody could say that they are bad singers or They all were considered to be good, not only good, but great. But there was always a dispute among all the connoisseurs of music, on who is the greatest of them all. And there could never be a single answer to that question. Likewise, you can always, in values, you can objectively answer the question, these are things of value, and these are things which have no value. But once you arrive at the domain of values, it's sometimes very hard to say, this is the best. That is not good enough. Then there's a dispute, right? So I think the point that I'm making is that the disputes are, once you have a certain caliber, you've reached a certain level of expertise, once you know ethics and morality, you can isolate some as objectively, very valuable. Objectively, they are of great significance. And you can distinguish them from those which are not of great significance. But once you've reached that domain of what is really good or what is right, there can be disputes. And those disputes can only be settled by you can still find an answer to the question, which is the best and which is the right, the most appropriate thing to do. But that will be dependent on a lot of context, and it will not be valid for all times, for all people, and so on. So ethics and morality are in the same category, I would say, although they have a completely different point and purpose. The same category. The judgments that are involved are of the same type that are involved in any highly skilled field, a field that involves a lot of skills. So art, for example, or a game such as cricket or tennis, and so on. And that's the way that I would like to answer the question. Now, for example, on the matter of what is a good life to lead and what is the best to lead, historically a number of answers have come up. Some people have argued that the life of contemplation, a life in the pursuit of truth, is the best life. Some people argue that a life in the pursuit of devotion, life pursuing God, devoted completely to God, the worship of God, is the best. Others have argued that a life lived in the public domain, pursuing public good, is the best life, right? Others have argued that, and this is now we're getting into a little more difficult terrain. Some people have argued that the life of a warrior, which involves courage and skills in the battlefield, that's the best life. Great honor and prestige comes with it. And there are many traditions, including the Brahminical tradition, the life of the householder, which is not the life of an ascetic wanderer. A life not when you leave your household and then go in pursuit of something else, but rather a life of equanimity lived within the household, in this world. That is the best form of life. Okay, so, but while all of these are admitted in, say, a small circle of what is a worthy life, and there is no single answer. It depends, from tradition to tradition, from context to context, which of them is the best. And maybe there is never going to be an answer to this question, which is the best way of, pursuing the ultimate. I think everybody recognizes that if people are simply drifting, people are wandering aimlessly, people who do one thing at some point of time and then quickly move to another thing and then to another thing, and neither develop their own skills nor arrive at anything which can be even called suboptimal. That's a life that is wasted. That is not a life that is extremely meaningful. One may combine all these things in a certain way and think of that as the best life. But, it's not any random combination would do. So I think all traditions will easily make a distinction between the life of a drifter, a wastrel, somebody who's forever following blindly his desires. Those are not considered to be worthy. But all these other things are considered to be life lived, well. And in the world, I mean, we've got examples of people leading lives which are worth emulating, and you'll always find, any of these examples from any of these, like the Buddha or Plato, or Ashoka, or these are lives which are again thought to be worth pursuing. I mean, they're taken as examples. I think in all this we have completely forgotten or not taken into account the life of say craftsmen, right? Those who toil and produce perfection through toil, right? I think, but even so those, that is another, you can include that. And these are so-called ordinary people who live their lives in an extraordinary manner, and there is no need to denigrate them. They can also be considered to be worthy, sometimes equally worthy. But I think the overall judgment of their life comes from the same source. We do evaluate what they achieve as something which is wonderful, which is an outcome of sustained labor and developed skills, certain virtues. So I think, yeah, that's the answer to my question. The other, I'll come, but maybe I should stop here. And there is a very important aspect that needs to be spelled out, but maybe, I can do that after I answer your next question.
So that's a wonderful way to look at it. And I think the best way to simplify it would be that there are multiple objectively, let's say, correct moral answers, and there are multiple objectively correct moral wrong answers to a specific question. And the best analogy that I can think of is what is, for instance, a healthy life. So there is no one objective answer to that, but we certainly know what a healthy life is not. We know that eating processed food is not a healthy life. Consuming cigarettes every day is not a healthy life. So would you say that the question of morality is the same as this analogy? Do you think this is the right way to approach it?
Yeah, so ethics, a number of very good philosophers have argued that there are many dimensions to ethics. And for me, in this book, I thought instead of talking about multiple dimensions, I'll just focus on two. One is the good life, right? Which is something that is led by one person or by a community of persons. And that involves making a distinction between what one desires and what one evaluates to be worthy of desiring. And that's a reflective process. You don't act only on impulse and instinct, raw instinct or raw impulse. You act on impulses which are cultivated from out of a fair amount of reflection, right? So you took the example of a healthy life. I mean, I may want to have a cigarette, and I can act on my desire and have a cigarette, but sometimes I step back and ask myself, is it a desire worth having? Because the impact of cigarettes on my body, the smoke on the body, is not very good. I mean, this creates a whole lot of unhealthy issues, and so I judge. This is something that I ask myself not to do. I restrain my desire in order to lead a better life. In this case, a better, healthy life as an individual. Now, that's one kind of restraint on desires, which is important. But there is another kind of restraint, and that is when I'm asking the question, I make an assessment that it's good for me not to smoke, right? Now, and I shouldn't live in an environment which is full of smoke. But supposing I'm traveling in an environment where there is a very anxious person who's just heard the news that somebody who he or she loves a lot is very badly ill, and he is addicted to smoking. And one of the ways in which he can give comfort to herself or himself is by having a cigarette, right? Now, at that moment, I have to judge whether I should, is my health so supremely important that even one cigarette by the other, the smoke emanating from one cigarette by the other, is going to cause me such discomfort that I will actually die or something like that. Or whether I should permit that guy to have one cigarette, because it's going to ease him. There is no other way of bringing himself to a certain level of equanimity. So here, another thing enters. It's not just about myself and what is good for me. I have to ask the question, no matter how good something is for me, no matter how good something is for me, am I harming the other by in pursuit of that good? Am I doing something? And that's where, right, am I doing something wrong to another? Am I harming others? And this is a different dimension. It is not focused on the self, whether it is your individual self or your community self. It's not focusing on yourself. It's focusing on those who are different from you, the other. And that is, in some traditions, has been identified as a different domain, sometimes a different domain altogether, and at other times a subdomain of ethics, which people have called morality, because morality has to do with how you may treat others and how you may avoid harming others. The others come into the picture. And since we are social creatures, social creatures who live not only with people who are similar to ourselves, but people who are also different from us, this question of morality becomes very important when we have to identify those of our actions which involve a restraint on our desires, because acting on those desires will actually cause harm to others. And you also have to evaluate not only what is good for me and what is bad for me, but what is good for me and what is bad for the other. Is what is good for me also good for the other? In which case we can come together and cooperate and do something. But if what is good for me is bad for the other, harms the other, then I shouldn't do it. At least I should pose that as a question before pursuing something unself-reflectively. So that is a different dimension of ethics. And all our rights, for example, the rights that they always involve not just our good, but also the potential harm that the pursuit of our right, the execution of our right may have on others, right? So, I mean, I'm putting it in the rights language, but we can use some other language. The point I'm making is that it's always important when we live in a society with differences. It's always important to also keep evaluating what harm our actions cause, even when we are pursuing something which is really good for us. So we can't just say that this is the best for us, but we have to also ask, is the best for us, does doing the best for us involve doing harm to others? And is that harm significant enough for us to prevent, to restrain ourselves in the pursuit of that good? If it is significantly harmful, then I think we have to accommodate the other. We have to adjust our actions. And that's a very important part of ethics. And sometimes some people have called that an entirely separate domain called morality. Yeah.
So this reminds me of the defense of secularism that you provided pretty early on in your academic career, which is that we have the class of ultimate ideals because people hold different and often contradictory religious views in a society as diverse as India. And secularism is essentially the answer to that. So it is defined almost in terms of as a sort of conflict resolution. I forget which paper it was, but so I'm wondering whether secularism is to be solely defined in terms of its conflict resolution, because if not, then what exactly are its normative value? That is, would it exist in a hypothetical society where there is a lot of religious diversity, there's a lot of religious contradictory views, but there is minimal conflict? Would secularism then be still necessary? Because that, I think, gets to the heart of the question, which is that what are the core values of secularism, or is it only a solution to a conflict?
Well, I think conflicts are of various kinds. We have property disputes. There can be disputes which have entirely got to do with prestige. There are territorial disputes. And by and large, they may not have any moral connotation to them. I'm saying by and large because sometimes, some moral values also intertwine with all these conflicts. Secularism, on the other hand, is nothing if it is not a resolution of a moral conflict. It has to be. You mentioned conflict of ultimate ideals. So that is to say, our highest conception of the good may clash with somebody else's highest conception of the good. I mean, take the example that I gave earlier. For a warrior, the pursuit of his good life is to conquer territories, and it may involve destruction and violence. And for a peace-loving person, a person who really takes, who's compassionate and who's compassionate not just to humans, but to animals, any form of violence to the other is a complete violation of the ethic of a peaceful life. So these are, and both may be in pursuit of these. But it's very clear that while the first one, the warrior ethic, is by definition harming others and therefore is immoral, a life of peace is not only a life, it's a life in the pursuit of the good, which is also a moral life, because it does no harm to others. It allows the other to be, and it forces the other to question whether a warrior ethic is a good ethic at all, whether it should be part of our ethic at all. Right? Maybe it is of no, maybe at some time it is okay, but the moment we start living a good social life, I think the one begins to question the very quality of I think secularism is really an idea which is it's a moral idea, primarily a moral idea which allows all people who are governed, who all live in the same territory, who are governed by a certain public power. It provides a way by which each one of us can live a good life in the pursuit of our high ideals, but do so in a manner which doesn't in any way strongly inhibit another party to do what we think we should be able to do. Each one of us, therefore, can live a life in pursuit of our respective conception of a good life or our ideals, but as long as it doesn't harm the other. Secularism, in that sense, is a framework of morality, which allows people to live to pursue their visions of the good. And in the context in which secularism is born and how it is even used today, I would say that we have different religio-philosophical conceptions of the good. Some are God-dependent, single God. Some are gods and goddesses dependent, many gods. And you know that there is a conflict between them. Those who believe in one God think that those who believe in gods and goddesses are doing something crazy. They're pursuing idolatry, or they're pursuing a false ideal. There's only one God, and anybody who thinks that there are many gods is actually straying from the true path. So there is a conflict between them. Likewise, there can be a conflict between both of these who believe in God or gods and goddesses and those who believe in no God, atheists, right? Or those who deny that there are many gods and goddesses, or that even there is one God. Now, the fact is that we live in societies which are very diverse and where all these people exist, right? And it's very hard for me, it's very difficult to make a sound argument in favor of one good life over another good life. It's I no longer find it. There was a time when I used to be obsessed with this question, what is the cognitively correct answer to the question whether God exists or not? But I don't think that question doesn't appeal to me anymore. What matters to me is more whether your belief in one God or in many gods or no God, whether it creates a good person, that and a moral person. That for me has become the central issue. And secularism is something which is an answer to that kind of conflict resolution, if you want to frame it in that way. Regardless of whether, what your ultimate aim of life is, or what you find, of great worth, you have to find a solution by which you can do so without harming others. And the language of rights and justice, which is, a very dominant language of today, you can say, I must pursue my good life without violating other people's rights or without causing great injustice to others. So we are looking for a rights-sensitive, justice-oriented morality by which we can all live together, not be at war with one another, but live together, which is another way of saying the same thing that you said, that this is something to do with conflict resolution. Well, it's not resolution, really, because it's not a full resolution in the sense that the motivating cognitive question is not fully answered. But I think it does provide a very good answer to the question how we have to live with each other. And we can always find a better answer. And if we do find a better answer, we should abandon secularism and move to that. But as long as we don't, then we should just stick to it. That's my view on this.
The ideal way for the state to intervene and solve the differences between the class of ultimate ideas, let's put it that way again, would be principal distance, according to you, which is that the state intervenes and the state is aware of the context, nature, according to the context, nature, or the current state of relevant religions. But doesn't the idea of principal distance imply that the state is actually aware of the historical context and has an objective or neutral enough view to properly implement the principles of secularism? Isn't this Doesn't this kind of give the state some form of arbitrary power, which in turn reinforces the interpretation that the state has of secularism
Yeah.
and of the proper way to implement over other interpretations?
Yeah. So first of all, I think let me clarify that I'm talking about a democratic state. I've always when I use the word state as a shorthand for a democratic state. And a democratic state is one which involves the participation of its citizens. At least all the citizens who are concerned with a particular issue must have an opportunity to participate. Some people do it by standing for public office. Some people do it by merely voting for the right person who they think will protect their interests. But a lot of the people actually do participate in the public domain by several different kinds of actions. They can write in the newspaper, they can speak in different public fora, they can now tweet or take part in social media. They can form civil society organizations or associate themselves with civil society organizations that act as pressure groups. So I think a Democrat, and of course they can put pressure on the executive or the judiciary to act in the right way. So for me, the responsibility is not with the executive alone. the responsibility is not even in the state alone. It is in a state whose boundaries are not rigid but porous, and where active citizens and civil society activists and the electronic and print media, all of them play a very important role. And this may take a little time in arriving at decisions, but that time is much better. It's very usefully spent because we want to arrive at the right decision, not at a wrong decision taken hastily. So anything that takes up to 10 years is fine as long as the decision that is arrived at, the law that is made, or the public policy that is being crafted, those are decent, defensible public policies. So, yeah, this is a state which I cannot even imagine, a state which is bound by the Constitution, a state which is responsive to its citizens, but that state cannot exercise power arbitrarily. So, although this needs to be spelled out, and I have spelled it out in different essays, they all need to be put together so that there is no misunderstanding that this is something which is so heavily dependent on some state which is completely distanced or isolated from civil society, and which is not responsive either to citizens or even to the judiciary, which is kind of authoritarian and arbitrary. That's I don't obviously have any of that in mind. I talk about a secular democratic state. In fact, the book that I've got a collection of essays which is called The Promise of Secular Democracy. So democracy is so much a part of this. Even if I'm state oriented, it doesn't mean that I'm kind of oblivious to other institutions and other organs of society, which we do not include in the word state. So yes, it is a state-oriented secularism, but that doesn't mean that it's state-centric, and it certainly certainly doesn't mean that it focuses entirely on a state which is authoritarian and which is arbitrary.
So I want to give you a hypothetical scenario, which is that imagine a state which is democratic, and the people believe that the correct way to be accommodative, to be plural and accepting of everyone, is to have a Hindu state, because the argument there that the Hindu nationalists are going to give is that Hinduism is the only true form of secularism because it is accepting or accommodating or pluralist or whatever. So here we have a scenario where the public, let's say the majority, is convinced that this is the right way to be, and because it gives the interpretive power to the state now implements Hinduism as a true form of secularism because it believes that only a Hindu state can be truly accommodative of all religions. So what is the response, the normative response to this?
So I think a truly inclusive state, that is to say, a state that is that includes everybody on fair and equal terms. A truly inclusive state cannot be defined by one idea of the good life, even if it is the maximally accommodative conception of the good life. So Hindus who believe that they are truly secular can give justification for the secular state in terms of by using Hinduism. That's fine. Okay, but the state cannot do that, because the moment it does that and justifies everything in Hindu terms, or therefore makes people identify the state with Hinduism. It will exclude others who are not Hindus. So one has to be, by definition, a Hindu state cannot be a secular state, because Muslims and Christians and Jains and Buddhists and Sikhs, they will not identify themselves with a state which is already calling itself a Hindu state. That is so. But if Hindu is defined not as a religion but as some other way of life, which is nothing to do with religion, right? Then willingly everybody else living in the same territory should be able to say that he is a Hindu. And if he willingly embraces the term Hindu, then the solution is, then the conflict is resolved. Because it's like, let's face it, the word Hindu, Hind, is an offshoot or just the word Sindhu pronounced differently. In fact, Hindu is a Persian term. The word that was used in the valley, in the Indus Valley, is Sindhu, right? The river Sindhu. It's all those people living across the river Sindhu who were Sindh wale log, right? I mean, whatever language they were used at that, whatever language was used at the time. And the Persians called it Hindu, and the Greeks call it Ind, right? Because they couldn't pronounce sir, and just as the Persians couldn't pronounce sir and made it into a her, the Greeks called it. So Indus or Ind, and the French still use the word learned, right? L-I-L'-I-N-D-E. Or India, Hindu and Sindhu are equivalent. So anybody who says we are all Indians, if anybody says we are all Hindus in that sense, there should be no objection. And it is used by a lot of people, right? People say we are Hindustanis. And there is a very interesting and subtle difference between being a Hindustani and being a Hindu, because the term Hindu over time has come to be associated with a particular religion, which is demarcated from other religions. So to call it a Hindu state means it's only for Hindus and not for others. But if you say it's a Hindustani state, it belongs to everybody. Likewise, if you say Indian state, it belongs to everybody. So you can also say Hindu state, in which case that neither of these terms used in that exclusive, compartmentalized way by which it is identified only with one and not with everybody else. So we have to be clear on this. If we are Hindus in the same sense in which we are Hindustanis and Indians, then I think the state in India is inclusive and Hindu. Oh, what's happened? Hello.
Yeah, apologies. It's the
No,
intervention.
yeah. If on the other hand, we are using the term Hindu in the sense of one religion, then to call it Hindu is like excluding all the others, whose homeland is the same as anybody else's. So a Muslim who has been living here for many years, I mean, let's assume that some of the people became moved on. I mean, many of these people were both Hindus and Muslims. And in the late 19th century, by an official census or by some instrumentality of the state, they were forced to choose between being one or the other. So some became only Hindus and some became only Muslims. But the fact that they became Muslims or Hindus didn't mean that their association with a territory, which is also called Hindustan or India or whatever, that remains the same. Many of the Muslims may actually be living here much longer than many of the Hindus. So to tell them to go away is or not, or that they don't belong here is catastrophic. It's something which is extremely upsetting. So I think we have to be clear on the sense in which the term is being used. I have no objections to it being called a Hindu state. If by Hindu we means Hindustani or Indian, then it includes everybody. And Islam is no longer an Indian religion. It's a Hindustani religion. You can say it's a Hindu religion also. But that is not the sense in which people use the term Hindu now. Hindu is being used to exclude others, not to include everybody. One second, just hold on.
So I wanted to ask you about what you think about the Partha Chatterjee's alternative to secularism, which is the idea of non-interference. That is, his idea is essentially that the state should not interfere in religion at all, and that there should be instead a democratic representative process among various religious bodies, and it is that representative body which is going to take decision regarding issues that have regulatory power over its members.
I'm not unsympathetic to the idea of democratization of religion. However, our state is committed to certain constitutional values, and those values, to my view, are objectively right. I think it's wrong to treat human beings as untouchables. It's wrong to exclude people on grounds of gender. It's wrong to discriminate people on grounds of gender, caste, religion, or any such thing, or race. I think these are objective wrongs. And we know that in democracies, provided you have a majority, you can take decisions which are, in that sense, objectively wrong. And I think that the Constitution is under obligation, and the state which works according to our Constitution is obliged to act when not just one individual, but whole communities, whether they're democratized or not. I mean, it's much better that they take democratic decision, but if the democratic decision still is deeply violative of certain, rights of women, then the state is obliged to step in. And that's where my problem lies with this idea, that this autonomy that is being granted to religious communities is so complete that it can be violative of all kinds of human rights. And I think that is a regressive step. It's not a progressive step. Now, that, as I said, this is not to say that the state then becomes arbitrary and imposes everything on individuals, even when the Constitution is on its side. But the state has then to walk a very thin line and ensure that enough people are on the side of the Constitution before it enacts a law. And also take a lot of time discussing the issue. There's no hurry about. I mean, the pressure the pressure comes from those who are victims, and it's a pressure to which the states must respond. And the wise people who are who have the common good of the country in mind, they should respond. So, I mean, I think this is a very easy way to resolve a certain conflict between religion and the state, give complete autonomy to religious communities, of the India are victims of those very religious communities, right? I mean, if that was the logic, then we would have had to wait for caste reforms to take place within Hinduism and then implement any of the laws, for example, that ban the using of wells by Dalits or that ban untouchability. Sorry, that allowed untouchability. I think there's certain practices which are so degrading that to allow them in your society is to participate in the perpetuation of that degradation. And I don't think any person with any conscience would allow that. So I think the solution by Partho, while it had some merit, I would not go by it.
So now I want to move on to the hope part, because so let's start with the state of Indian universities and the state of higher education. Are you hopeful about the current state of Indian universities? Are you hopeful about its future, or what do you think about the attacks on academic freedom that Indian universities, both private and public, face from uh, the establishment?
I mean, I simply don't understand how I just heard that foreign universities are going to be allowed in India, and they will be given a lot of autonomy. And in fact, many vice chancellors of domestic universities were saying that they wish that the same autonomy was granted to them. Again, I think, if anything, more autonomy should be available to our own universities than to foreign universities. But even if the argument for more autonomy is weak, there can certainly be no argument for greater autonomy to be given for foreign universities. They should all be treated on par. Foreign universities, no university, actually, all universities by definition have to be world class, right? They can't be narrowly focused on the nation. Universities refer to a universe of particularly ideas. And you welcome not only ideas, but people who bring those ideas. So that openness is something which is an integral part of a university. The old question is whether there should be a regulatory framework when there is discrimination or where there is exclusion, when there is instead of openness, there is closure of different kinds. I think then some higher body or a separate body, impartial body, has to step in. And I think there is no reason why this body should regulate every university. I mean, a university by definition being open must and therefore autonomous from all kinds of pressures of the wealthy and the rich, wealthy and the powerful. What was I saying? Sorry. What was the question that you'd asked? We'll have to edit
the state of universities.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an attempt again to put people of a certain ideology at the helm of universities and recruited as teachers in the university. I think that's a disaster. There should be people of all hues in the university, and there should be an open and free debate amongst them to come to a consensus or to settle their differences, or to learn to live with differences. So that plurality and openness is something which is integral to the university. But to try and push them into one uniform view, either getting students of a certain kind, or teachers, or administration that favor only one, is a disaster. If that is what you're referring to, I would certainly be very strongly against it. And we have seen evidence of that. It's very easy to destroy places. See, the JNU, for example, has its flaws. Any institution that survives for some time must have some virtues. But it also, over a period of time, it's possible that some flaws were there from the very beginning, and some flaws that university acquired over a period of time. Human beings are not perfect, and they have a tendency to turn a blind eye to their own flaws. They don't even notice when those flaws creep in. And we must be sensitive to those flaws, and those flaws have to be brought out in the open through public scrutiny and public discussion. And so I would be the last person to say that some university called JNU has no flaws and that it's perfect. But I think you cannot destroy a university to create something. You have to reform it, and reform it by, just as you're reforming any other community. We were talking about that some time back. You reform it by discussion, debate, and consent. You don't do it by imposition. The impression that I have is that it's all being done, through manipulation and by force of different kinds. Very subtle, and sometimes not so subtle. And that is very, I can only say that it's lamentable.
Do you not think that universities themselves, not the state interference as such, but certain universities, let's say, has a certain ideological hue? BHU might have a certain Hindu nationalist hue, JNU might have a certain leftist hue. And it is that ideological hue, perhaps the professors who are, let's say the JNU professor recruiting a professor, they're probably more likely to recruit someone who agrees with their point of view versus someone who disagrees with their point of view. Do you
Yeah,
see that as a problem?
Yeah, I think that would be a very sad state of affairs. Supposing I, as a teacher, was given scripts and of students, and no matter what the quality of the script is, if I just gave high marks to people who agree with me and give low marks to people who don't agree with me, and regardless of their writing, the quality of their argument, the quality of evidence they provide, I don't care any of that. I just look at whether they agree with me or not agree with me. Don't you think that would be absurd? The best way would be, just an even worse instance would be not just ideological preference, but caste or religion or gender. All males have to be given 70 out of 70. All people from my caste will get 75 out of 75. All people from my religion will be given high marks. That is absurd. The whole point of the university is lost. So I don't know if anything as dramatic as that happens in any university, but if anything kind of comes even close to it, it is a very bad practice. On the contrary, it is the duty of a teacher to empathetically teach different viewpoints and to inculcate a sense of reasoning and judgment in the student. To be able to arrive, that is true autonomy, right? To be able to arrive at his or her judgments based on how he reasons. He's not asked, he shouldn't be told what the answers are. He should be told how to generate answers to questions which are provided to him. That's the skill that has to be taught at the university. And if that is the case, a teacher is duty bound to be pluralist, to be impartial to different points of views. I mean, it's the same thing with the university and the media are two institutions which are fundamentally liberal in the best sense of the word. They should be open and reasonably accommodative of everybody, and let them decide how to arrive at the truth, how to make judgments. The teacher is a guide. He can provide the exemplar, but he can't teach a viewpoint and make everybody conform to the viewpoint, because that gives the teacher an absolute right to knowledge, to the claim to knowledge, and which is not what the teacher should ever pretend to have or to be. I mean, the fallibility is something which is fundamental to a human being, and education is always learned through experimentation, and experiments can go wrong. They don't necessarily lead to the true answer, and making mistakes is part of that experiment, and learning from the mistakes and getting to the right path is very, very important. It's only then that by a certain age, you have the habit of making correct judgments. Otherwise, everybody will just spend all their time trying to reach judgments which should take not very much time, given the scarcity of time and given the scarcity of resources, human resources. We need to arrive at quick judgments, but those quick judgments they don't come from the sky. You have to learn them over a period of time. And that learning, slow, patient learning, हिंदुस्तानी म्यूजिक में उसको रियाज कहते हैं. वो रियाज बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है, टाइम लगता है उसमें. So it's only after 40-50 years that you start playing an instrument or you start singing effortlessly. And it looks as if you're born with that, but nobody's born with something like that. You learn it, and learning to make judgments is what universities are all about, and that takes time. Being slow is a virtue. Being instant is not. All good things of life take time, and education, the right kind of education and the right kind of acquiring the right kind of skills is a lot of practice. We know from even cricket, just imagine the kind of hard work that goes into the making of a good cricketer. How much sacrifice. That is that's an example of an ethics, the cricketing ethic. How to be a good cricketer involves a lot of restraint. You need to give up a lot. You need to sacrifice a lot. You put in all your time that you could have spent on seeing films and going out in parties and drinking and doing all kinds of things which others do. You live a disciplined life in order to become a good cricketer. And that is exactly what is needed to become a good, whatever it is that you want to be good at, a good student at philosophy. So
Beautiful. So I want to end this by asking you about future, because we live in times of despair, and in your columns you opine a lot about the sad state of our contemporary affairs. And I want to talk about hope in times of despair. Are you hopeful about the future of this country? If you are, is it based on pure sentimentality, or is it based on an observation of patterns that you've seen before?
bit of both. I've got a very bad cough. No, I mean, hope by definition overreaches reason. One hopes when one reaches, if reason takes you up to a point and then it stops going in the same direction that you were hoping, that you wanted it to go. And then you begin to hope. It's beyond your control. Something beyond your control, we cannot bring it to. And then you hope for the best. You either pray or you hope. So where do I stand today? I think, as I said, between hope and despair. It's very difficult to be hopeful all the time, but it's very counterproductive to be despairing all the time. There are some, as you talked about cycles. Yes, there are, the bad times have a cycle of 20, 30 years. Unfortunately, some countries never really get out of those bad times. There are some really tragic countries. They fall from one evil into the lap of another evil. I think India is lucky not to have had that cycle. Even when some people believed that we are moving from one evil to another, have unexpectedly arrived at the evil turning good or something good happening. Nobody would have expected it. The British never felt that they were going to leave the country in the 1940s. Otherwise, they would not have built, this Viceroy's House, Connaught Place. All this New Delhi was built in the 30s. If you were to tell them that, what the hell are you doing? In 10 years' time, you'll be gone from here. They would never have believed you. But some unexpected developments took place. And by 45, 46, it was clear that their days are numbered in India. So cycles have ended out of a stroke of good luck, by some miracle, I think that can well happen in India. But one of the most pernicious, it's very difficult, and I've written about this as well, it's very difficult not to be tempted by wealth, fame, or power. But if you aim for them and you succeed in them, in realizing a life of wealth, fame, and power, and if, God forbid, someone gets all of them at the same time, then sooner or later his life will be ruined. He would not lead a meaningful life. All these things can come to you as a byproduct. And as I said, obviously, some material well-being, some power, which is to be put to good use, and therefore having a sense of what is good and bad, and some recognition of the work that you've done in wider public. All these things are important. So I'm not against them. But if we aim to achieve wealth, power, and fame, and keep seeking those all the time, then I don't think we'll be able to achieve a meaningful, worthwhile life. And whatever life we achieve will disappear very quickly, because we'll have lost the skills to lead a meaningful life, because we're completely enraptured by all these. So I think that many people in the middle class upwards, get very sucked into this. But ordinary people who are not in this game don't get sucked into it. And they still retain a certain vision on which people can build. They themselves can build with the help of others. So in one of my chapters called The Power of Ordinary People or something like that. I've written something like that. And I do believe that I think we're lucky to have had a good constitution. I think we are lucky that so many people with different ideologies and different viewpoints came together and came to some kind of an agreement. Even if they were half-hearted about it, they came to an agreement on a common constitutional morality. The fact that document is there, that itself is a signal of hope. So there is hope. It's not all despair. I think it's important. And also people, I think it's important to not only realize that one has made mistakes, but to learn from them. And here I'm referring to all those people who found, who believe in a certain idea of India. I think they made terrible mistakes in the last 50 years. And to keep blaming it on the other and saying that they are responsible for everything and to absolve themselves from all the blame, I think that's horrid. That's no way of going about things. You know, you can apportion some blame on the other, but you have to also realize where you went wrong, what mistakes you made, and correct those mistakes. That'll be good for you because it will help in the making of a better society, but it'll also help you not to repeat those mistakes. If you're wise enough, you will not repeat those mistakes, in which case you will sustain that society, the good society, better. I think I can only say this much. I mean, there are lots of things where one is only, one is filled with disgust, the excessive violence, the lynchings, the rapes and the thrashing of Dalits, the unashamed thrashing of, I think all of this is very, it's very disturbing. It's not good enough to say this used to happen every day, all the time. Too bad if it's happening all the time. The fact is if we can see it now, we better stop it. No point blaming. Nobody, you can't continue to do something horrible simply because it's happened in the past. You have to put an end to something. If you find it wrong, stop. And when earlier governments were in power, we would have blamed them. And if this government whichever government is in power, in the state or in the center, we've got to blame them because they are the power wielders. And therefore, they have greater responsibility because they're the only ones who are capable of putting a stop to it. Individuals can't do it. It's the power. The state has the power. Therefore, it has to be held more responsible for allowing it to continue the way it is continuing. So that's why I thought I've encouraged people to make judgments. At least people should speak freely and make judgments on where we've gone wrong. Then we may have then there may be hope of stopping and preventing these things from happening. If we don't even see them, and when something bad is happening, we can't recognize it as bad, then you can only despair. There's no hope.
I do think that there is hope because I believe in the resilience of the people of India, and I believe that we will have better times in the future.
Mm-hmm.
It was an honor talking with you, and I'll put the link to the books in the description below. Like, subscribe, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you.